Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the ESTP personality type.
Okay.
We've got a couple of articles from the Spiritual Seek.
Right.
And our goal is to try and paint as clear a picture as we can about what makes these ESTPs tick.
Okay.
Their strengths, weaknesses,
Okay.
how they kind of move through the world.
Yeah. Sounds good. So ESTPs are often described as kind of the energetic, action-oriented type, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty common perception.
For sure. And all the nicknames that we see associated with them, like you said, really highlight that. The doer, the persuader, the entrepreneur, the dynamo.
Right.
So clearly we're dealing with somebody who likes to get things done, take charge.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about those nicknames is it suggests a very outward focus.
Yeah.
Right. Someone who thrives on engaging with the external world.
Definitely. Both of the articles that we're looking at really emphasize that they live in the present moment.
Okay.
Concrete experiences are their thing.
Yeah.
More so than kind of abstract ideas. One of the articles even uses the analogy of bold strokes on a canvas to describe them, always seeking out new adventures.
I like that. I think that's a good way to put it. It really captures their dynamic and spontaneous nature. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that every personality type has its strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
It's not about saying one is good or bad, but it's understanding the unique mix of traits that they possess.
For sure. And when it comes to strengths for the ESTP, their people skills are always front and center.
Yeah.
They're often described as charming. They're persuasive. They're good at reading those nonverbal cues.
Which makes sense given their focus on the present moment and their extroverted nature. I mean, they're going to be really tuned in to those subtle signals in those interactions.
Absolutely. They're also known for being very practical. They're decisive. They can think on their feet. They come up with solutions really quickly.
Yeah.
And all of that energy and enthusiasm makes them, excel in those fast-paced environments.
For sure. Those are really valuable traits in so many situations, especially those that require you to adapt and think quickly.
Yeah.
But it's worth considering the potential downsides, right?
Right.
Could that same impulsivity that makes them exciting also lead to trouble? Maybe even some insensitive remarks.
It's definitely something to consider. And their tendency to kind of live in the moment can also make those long-term plans and commitments a bit of a challenge.
Right. It seems like a classic trade-off.
Yeah.
The spontaneity is exhilarating, but it might also be difficult to manage in certain situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that both of the articles bring up is that they tend to find routine and, kind of abstract concepts a bit boring.
Again, that ties back to their preference for concrete experiences and their need for constant stimulation. To understand this a little bit better, it might be helpful to look at the concept of cognitive functions.
Okay.
One of the articles explains how these functions basically shape how ESTPs see the world and interact with it.
Yeah, it gets a little technical, but essentially these functions are the mental processes that are driving our behavior and our decisions.
Right. And for ESTPs, the dominant function is extroverted sensing.
Okay.
And that seems to be the force behind their constant need for those real-world experiences, that action-oriented approach.
Yeah. Like they're wired to engage with their surroundings,
Yeah.
seek out sensory stimulation.
Exactly. And then you have their auxiliary function, which is introverted thinking, which helps them process information logically and then make those quick decisions that we were talking about.
It's like this combination of awareness of their surroundings, but then an internal process of logical analysis. It's pretty interesting.
A fascinating combination.
Yeah.
And while they're not as prominent, we can't forget about those tertiary and inferior functions,
Right.
extroverted feeling and introverted intuition.
Right.
They still play a role, even if it's more subtle, in things like social interactions and gut feelings.
Yeah. It's about understanding how all these cognitive processes work together, not just focusing on those dominant ones.
Exactly. But let's kind of shift gears a bit and talk about ESTPs and relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, their extroverted nature probably makes them pretty fun-loving partners and friends.
I would agree with that,
I
yeah.
would think so, yeah. But those same tendencies towards impulsivity and difficulty with long-term commitments could also create some challenges, don't you think?
Absolutely. And that's where, open communication and understanding are probably key, right?
Yeah, for sure.
When navigating those relationships.
Absolutely. And being mindful of their need for novelty and spontaneity.
Yeah, for sure.
It's all about finding that balance between that desire for excitement and then the need for stability and commitment that relationships often require.
Right.
Now, moving on to careers, it's probably safe to assume that ESTPs gravitate towards roles that involve action, variety, and of course, lots of social interaction.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, based on everything we've talked about so far, it makes sense that they thrive in those more dynamic environments where they can really put their strengths to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're talking sales, marketing, entrepreneurship, maybe even something fast-paced and hands-on like emergency medicine or law enforcement.
Right, right. It's really interesting how certain personality traits seem to align so well with specific career paths.
Yeah.
But we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
Let's delve a little deeper into some of these descriptions from the article so we can get a better understanding of these tendencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the sources paints a really kind of vivid picture of how ESTPs approach life and decision-making.
Okay.
And it describes them as, outgoing, straight-shooting types,
Uh-huh.
individuals who are enthusiastic, excitable, and really driven by action.
Right.
They're the ones who jump headfirst into situations, ready to roll up their sleeves and get things done.
Yeah, that aligns perfectly with what we've discussed so far, right? Energy and practicality really seem to be defining characteristics.
Yeah.
But tell me more about how these traits show up in their day-to-day lives.
Sure. Well, the article goes on to describe them as blunt and straightforward risk takers
Okay.
who, again, prioritize the present moment
Uh-huh.
over things like introspection or theoretical musings.
Yeah. Their focus on the here and now seems to be a recurring theme in their personality profile. It's like they're constantly scanning the environment, assessing the situation, making decisions on the fly.
Exactly. And they rely heavily on their gut instincts and their ability to kind of analyze facts quickly,
Yeah.
which makes them very adaptable, responsive in those, fast-paced, unpredictable environments.
Right. Makes sense. I'm curious to hear more about their decision-making process.
Okay, well, the source actually highlights their remarkable ability to perceive people's attitudes and motivations.
Okay.
So they pick up on subtle cues that others might miss, like facial expressions, body language.
Interesting. That's a powerful skill to have in social interactions. It suggests a high level of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
Almost like they have an innate sense of how to work a room and get what they want.
Yeah, very much so. But as you mentioned earlier, every strength has its potential, shadow side.
Right.
Right.
It's a reminder that even the most positive traits can have unintended consequences if they're not used thoughtfully.
Right. And the article points out that ESTPs often view things like rules and laws as mere guidelines rather than strict mandates.
Okay.
So, if they believe something needs to be done, it's kind of a do it and get on with it attitude that takes precedence.
That independent trait can be both admirable and challenging.
Right.
It allows them to break free from those conventions, but it can also lead to conflict.
Absolutely. But despite this, tendency to kind of bend the rules, they're actually described as having a very strong personal code of ethics.
Okay.
They believe in fairness. They stick to their principles.
Right. That's an important distinction, I think.
Yeah.
Their actions seem to be guided by this really deep-seated sense of right and wrong, even if their methods might not always be traditional.
Absolutely. The article also talks about their flair for drama and style. They're described as fast-moving, fast-talking people who appreciate the finer things in life.
Yeah, that vibrancy and energy is probably what makes them so captivating and engaging.
Yeah.
Right. Could there be blind spots related to that?
There could be, yeah. And the source mentions that, while they love to have fun, they love to kind of bring enjoyment to those around them, they might unintentionally hurt others with their words
Okay.
because they're not always tuned in to the emotional impact of their actions.
That makes sense, right? I mean, their focus on action and logic might sometimes lead to a lack of sensitivity toward others' feelings.
Yeah, it's not that they don't care about people. It's quite the opposite.
Right.
But their decision-making process really prioritizes practicality and efficiency
Right.
over emotional considerations.
Gotcha. That's a key insight into their mindset.
Yeah.
That helps explain why they might sometimes come across as insensitive, even if that's not their intention.
Right. And this brings us to another interesting point that one of the sources makes, is that the ESTP's least developed area is their intuitive side.
Interesting.
They tend to be impatient with abstract theories
Okay.
and really prefer a hands-on approach to life and learning.
Which makes sense considering their dominant function is all about engaging with that concrete world.
Right.
Right. It's the opposite of intuition. Intuition is about seeing those patterns and trusting your gut.
Exactly. And because they're not as comfortable with that, with intuition, they may actually have like strong gut reactions that turn out to be inaccurate.
Mm-hmm.
So this can lead to them kind of being skeptical of their own instincts and those of others.
Interesting.
Yeah,
It's a good reminder that everyone has areas where they can grow and develop.
for sure.
And recognizing those weaknesses can actually lead to greater self-awareness and personal growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these different aspects of personality all kind of intertwine. Speaking of learning, I'm curious, how do ESTPs approach education?
Yeah.
Given their preference for concrete experience over abstract thinking, I imagine there might be some interesting dynamics there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the source actually points that out, that, they can struggle in those traditional academic settings
Right.
where theory is emphasized over practical application.
Makes sense.
So they really thrive in environments where they can, learn by doing experimenting, seeing tangible results.
Yeah. It's not that they lack intelligence. It's more about aligning their learning with their natural way of processing information.
Yeah.
They might excel in fields like apprenticeships or project-based courses where active learning is key.
Exactly. Finding that right learning environment that leverages those strengths is super important.
Yeah.
So speaking of strengths, how do those strengths translate into their careers?
Right.
So we know they need constant movement, action. So restrictive or confining jobs are probably not a good fit.
They need a career that can keep up with their energy and desire to make a real impact, right?
Yeah.
Something that offers challenge and variety.
Yeah, absolutely. And this source specifically calls out that, ESTPs actually make exceptional salespeople.
Oh, interesting.
They have that natural charm, that persuasiveness.
Yeah.
And they connect with people so easily, which, come on, those are like essential for success in sales.
That makes perfect sense. They can read people, they understand their needs, and they can present information in such a compelling way. They're
Right.
not just selling a product, right? They're
Right.
building relationships.
Right. And what about that entrepreneurial spirit that we talked about earlier?
Right.
That's often a driving force for them as well. They have the vision, the drive, the willingness to take risks.
It's like these career paths were tailor-made for them. You combine those social skills, quick thinking, willingness to embrace challenges, all traits that ESTPs seem to possess in abundance.
Right.
But even within those fields, they probably need a certain level of autonomy and flexibility, right?
Absolutely. Highly structured, bureaucratic environments, probably not going to be a good fit. They need to feel that sense of ownership over their work. They need the freedom to make decisions, to take action.
Yeah, they need to see the impact of their work.
Right.
They need to know that they're making a tangible difference. That sense of purpose is key for them.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And the source also kind of highlights an area where they might need to, focus on growth, and that's following through.
Okay.
So while they're like phenomenal at initiating projects, getting things started, they might struggle with seeing things through to completion.
Interesting. So their enthusiasm and energy might wane once that initial excitement of a project fades.
Exactly. So it's definitely something that they should be aware of and actively work on. Developing strategies for maintaining focus and motivation
Yeah.
is going to be crucial for their long-term success, even when tasks become, routine or tedious.
Yeah. Perhaps they can leverage their strength in improvisation
Yeah.
to find creative ways to kind of stay engaged.
What's that?
Right. Instead of viewing that routine as an obstacle, they could challenge themselves to approach it in new ways.
Right.
Bring in some of that spontaneity that they're known for.
Yeah. It's about reframing their perspective,
Mm.
finding ways to align even those mundane aspects of work with their need for novelty and excitement.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we've gained some pretty valuable insight from this first source into the ESTP personality.
I agree.
We've seen their core characteristics, their strengths, their potential areas for growth.
It's been a fascinating exploration of their action-oriented, present-focused, highly engaging approach to life.
Yeah.
But we have another source to consider, which might offer a slightly different perspective.
Okay, yeah. So this second source, it introduces a couple of new nicknames for ESTPs,
Oh, okay.
the Persuader and the Dynamo, which, again, kind of play on that energy and impact on others.
Right. So it seems like a recurring theme here is their ability to influence and inspire those around them,
Right.
which makes sense when you consider their extroverted nature, strong communication skills, and natural charisma.
Right.
They draw people in and make things happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This source also echoes that idea of, practicality over abstract theory,
Yeah.
which really seems to be a defining characteristic of their cognitive style.
It's like they're really grounded in the real world,
Right.
focused on what they can see and experience firsthand.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the source describes them as decisive thinkers with strong people skills, individuals who quickly analyze situations, identify solutions, and take action.
And they much prefer to improvise rather than rely on,
Yeah.
meticulous plans.
Right.
Again, speaking to that adaptability and ability to think on their feet in a fast-paced world.
Right. But that doesn't mean they lack discipline.
Right.
The source describes them as highly disciplined individuals who can work independently and achieve their goals.
Yeah, it really challenges that idea that spontaneity and impulsivity can't coexist with, discipline and focus.
Yeah.
Right? In the case of ESTPs, these traits seem to work together.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's also this interesting observation about their ability to perceive and interpret nonverbal communication.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, the source suggests they kind of have this natural ability to pick up on those subtle cues, like body language, facial expressions.
Fascinating. So it suggests a really high level of emotional intelligence, even if they don't always express it in conventional ways.
Right.
It's like they have this sixth sense for understanding those unspoken dynamics of social situations.
Right. And this source also touches upon the potential challenge of long-term commitments,
Yeah.
which we kind of touched on earlier. Right. Their focus on the present, their need for novelty, can sometimes make it difficult for them to commit to long-term plans or relationships.
Makes sense. And their impulsivity, while exciting, can sometimes lead to actions or words they later regret, especially in those close relationships.
Absolutely.
It highlights the need for self-awareness and open communication in those relationships.
Definitely.
Openly discussing needs and expectations.
Right.
That can really help bridge the gap between their desire for spontaneity and their partner's need for stability.
Absolutely.
Huh.
But let's shift gears again. Let's talk career paths.
Okay.
This source, like the first one, suggests that variety, action, social interaction, those are key.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if this one mentions any specific careers that weren't mentioned in that first source.
Yeah, so it hits on sales and marketing again, which we already discussed.
Okay.
But it also suggests that they excel in these fast-paced, hands-on fields that require quick thinking and adaptability. So, like emergency medical personnel, police officers.
Wow, those are certainly high-pressure roles.
Right.
Demand quick thinking, resourcefulness, and a tolerance for the unexpected.
Right. And those roles provide that hands-on, real-world experience, right?
Yes.
Which aligns with their preference for concrete action.
It seems like a perfect fit for their skill set and personality.
Right. But to understand this even further, let's kind of delve into those cognitive functions that shape the ESTP personality.
Yeah, let's do it.
Starting with extroverted sensing as their dominant function.
It's always helpful to revisit those functions. They really provide this framework for understanding the inner workings of different personality types.
Right. As we've already discussed, extroverted sensing really drives their focus on the present, their love for those sensory experiences, their action-oriented approach.
It's the lens through which they perceive the world.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
constantly seeking out those new and stimulating experiences.
Exactly.
They're reality-focused, sensation-seeking individuals who are drawn to the details of their immediate surroundings.
Right. And they're not content with just observing. They want to interact with their environment,
Yes.
experience things firsthand.
Yeah, it's this active engagement with the world that really fuels their energy and their enthusiasm.
Right.
But this constant need for stimulation can also lead to boredom in situations that are too repetitive or lacking in challenge.
Absolutely. So moving on to their auxiliary function, which is introverted thinking, this plays a key role in their decision-making.
Right.
So it's logic, analysis, objective reasoning, breaking down information, evaluating it based on, those internal principles.
Right, so it helps them make sense of all the information they're gathering through extroverted sensing.
Exactly.
They're analyzing those situations, identifying patterns, developing solutions.
And they're really good at applying that logical thinking to real-world problems, finding practical and, applicable solutions.
Right.
And they're not afraid to experiment and adapt as needed.
And that adaptability is so essential, especially in today's world.
Right.
Now, what about their tertiary function, extroverted feeling?
Okay.
We know it's less prominent, but it still influences those social interactions.
Right. Extroverted feeling is all about connecting with others, building relationships, and creating harmony.
Yeah.
So it's understanding and responding to the emotional needs of those around you.
And while ESTPs may not be as naturally attuned to emotions as some other personality types, they still have a need for connection.
Yeah.
They want to be liked.
Right. And this source describes them as outgoing and people-pleasing individuals
Okay.
who, enjoy being the center of attention, skilled at building rapport.
It seems like their charm and charisma plays a big role in those interactions.
Right.
But could this lead to them suppressing their own needs or opinions to maintain that social harmony?
Is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, they might struggle with kind of asserting themselves, especially if they fear disrupting that social balance.
Mm-hmm.
But this extroverted feeling can also, manifest in altruistic ways, driving them to use their skills and energy to help others, to make a positive impact.
It's interesting how this function can motivate people to contribute to something larger than themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, finally, let's touch on their inferior function, which is introverted intuition.
Okay.
So this is about looking beyond the surface,
Right.
seeing patterns, trusting those gut feelings.
Right. And because it's their inferior function, they might not be as comfortable or confident with this aspect of themselves.
Right.
It's an area with potential for growth, but also potential challenges.
Exactly. And the source suggests that they may actually have those strong intuitive insights, but distrust them because they're not rooted in concrete evidence or logic.
It's that tension between the dominant and the inferior functions.
Right.
Extroverted sensing is so strong, it can kind of overshadow that less developed introverted intuition.
Right. And this can lead to, uncertainty, self-doubt. When it comes to trusting those gut feelings, it's a reminder that developing self-awareness and recognizing the value of all their cognitive functions, even the less dominant ones, is important for their personal growth. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
In our deep dive into the ESTP personality, we've explored their characteristics, their strengths and weaknesses, and even their potential career paths.
Yeah, through these two sources, we've gained, I think, a really deep understanding of what makes this personality type so dynamic, engaging, and influential.
They are truly the doers, the persuaders, the ones who make things happen.
They are.
And their impact is felt in so many areas of life.
Absolutely. And I think understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, the cognitive functions that drive their behavior helps us appreciate their contributions, but also navigate our interactions with them more effectively.
Absolutely.
And for all the ESTPs out there listening,
Yeah.
embrace your strengths, acknowledge your weaknesses, and never stop exploring, experiencing, and making your mark on the world.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for anyone, really.
Absolutely.
But as we wrap up our deep dive today into the world of the ESTPs,
Right.
I think it's always helpful to kind of summarize the key takeaways, right?
Yeah.
Because we've covered a lot of ground, and it's easy to kind of lose sight of the main points.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think from the beginning, it was clear that action, energy, and a zest for life are really central to the ESTP personality.
For sure.
Right. And I think those nicknames we discussed, the doer, the persuader, the entrepreneur, and the dynamo, really kind of encapsulate their essence.
Absolutely.
They highlight their proactive nature, their ability to influence others, and their constant drive to, make things happen. They're
Right.
not afraid to take the lead and dive into new experiences.
And we also learned that ESTPs are very present-focused individuals.
Yes,
Concrete experiences are what they thrive on.
for sure.
Abstract theories and concepts, those don't hold their attention for very long.
Right.
Their preference is to learn by doing, to see tangible results.
Exactly. And their dominant function, extroverted sensing, really explains this preference for engaging with the world through their senses. That's what drives them to constantly seek out those new and stimulating experiences.
They're the ones who jump into situations head first, ready to roll up their sleeves and get things done.
Exactly.
They're adaptable. They can improvise solutions like in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, that quick thinking combined with their ability to analyze information logically through introverted thinking
Right.
makes them excellent problem solvers, especially in those fast-paced environments.
For sure.
They can assess a situation, come up with a plan of action very quickly.
And their people skills, we can't forget about that.
Absolutely. Their charm, persuasiveness, ability to read those nonverbal cues, it's remarkable.
Yeah, their social intelligence, which stems from that extroverted feeling, really helps them connect with others so effortlessly.
Yes.
They build rapport so easily and navigate those social situations with, a natural grace.
Right. But As with any personality type, it's important to acknowledge that those strengths can also have a shadow side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Their impulsivity, while making them exciting and spontaneous, can sometimes lead to trouble.
Right.
They might make insensitive remarks or act without thinking about the consequences.
And that preference for living in the moment, it can also make long-term planning and commitments a challenge.
For sure. And that's where open communication and understanding are really crucial, especially in relationships with ESTPs.
Absolutely.
It's about finding that balance between their desire for excitement and the need for stability.
Right. We also talked about how that discomfort with abstract concepts and their need for constant stimulation might make those, like, traditional academic settings a little bit challenging for them.
Right. However, their practical, hands-on approach to learning makes them really well suited for fields that emphasize real-world application, experiential learning.
Right.
They need to be able to see that direct impact of their efforts.
Exactly. And when it comes to careers, the ideal path for an ESTP offers variety, action, a good deal of social interaction.
Yeah, we discussed several fields where they can really thrive. Sales, marketing, entrepreneurship, even those fast-paced, hands-on fields like emergency medicine or law enforcement.
Right.
These are all areas where they can leverage their strengths and make a real difference.
So to kind of wrap things up, what's the main takeaway?
The main takeaway for me is that ESTPs are dynamic individuals who bring this really unique blend of energy, practicality, and charisma to everything they do.
Yeah.
They are the doers, they're the persuaders, the ones who make things happen.
Right.
And their impact is felt in many areas of life.
For sure.
Understanding their strengths, their weaknesses, the cognitive functions that drive their behavior helps us appreciate their contributions and navigate our interactions with them more effectively.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of ESTPs.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you learned something today and maybe even gained a new appreciation for this dynamic personality type.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.